Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Rabia, and I lead marketing here at CSI, an affiliate of Moody's. I'm happy to welcome everyone today for the first in a series of events that we host every year as part of our Financial Literacy Month initiatives. Before we begin, we have a little bit of housekeeping. The ratings, financial analysis, projections, and other observations constituting part of the information contained herein are and must be construed solely as statements of opinion and not statements of fact or recommendations to purchase, sell, or hold any securities. We strongly recommend you speak with a qualified financial advisor regarding your own unique circumstances. We ask that no one record this webinar without Moody's explicit written permission. And lastly, no one has permission to quote any of the comments made or questions asked by the webinar audience. Today's webinar is being recorded. All members of the audience are currently on mute. If you have a question, we encourage you to please type it into the Q&A box on your right. We ask that you please keep your questions as generic as possible and avoid personal or client-specific information. So now let's get started with the webinar. Today we have the pleasure of hosting Neela White, a distinguished senior portfolio manager and co-founder of Blue Wing Advisor Group at 3Max, a division of Raymond James Limited. With an impressive career spanning over 26 years in wealth management, Neela brings an abundance of knowledge and expertise, holding esteemed credentials like the Certified International Wealth Manager and Chartered Investment Manager designations. Neela's passion for gerontology and elder care, stemming from personal experiences, has shaped her into a dedicated advocate for aging individuals. And as a certified professional consultant on aging, elder planning counselor, and with her academic background in psychology and gerontology, Neela's approach to financial planning is deeply informed by the complexities of aging. In today's session, Neela will expand on the critical importance of long-term care planning, guiding us through strategies to ensure financial advisors can effectively safeguard client savings, their lifestyle, and peace of mind into retirement. Neela, thank you so much for joining us today. We're so excited to explore this topic with you, and I'll hand you the mic.
Great. Thank you for having me today. It's a real thrill to be here talking about a subject that, for me, is my passion project. And I think just as a person who is approaching middle age and being an advisor, I think it's one of those conversations that become more and more necessary to be having with our own community, our family, our friends, our spouses, our partners, as well as our clients as part of a whole holistic retirement plan. So let's start with how it actually begins. Where does the family sort of step in, or what are the stories that you start hearing from your client when you have meetings or do a bit of a check-in? It starts with what's called an IADL, which is an independent activity of daily living. So that includes, and we've all experienced this at some points, shopping and meal prep, whether it's for our aging parents or whether it's actually for becoming a new parent ourselves. We have to do the shopping and the meal prep to streamline our routine. Communication, you have to help mom and dad or the clients manage personal finances, pay bills. You become a bit of an Uber, taking mom and dad to appointments and being a second set of ears. Communication, what was said compared to what was heard and understood. And medications, are the people around you taking the medications that they're supposed to help achieve optimal health? And then once we see those things happen, those 6 things, it tends to progress slowly. For some people, depending on what their health trajectory is, it could be sort of a downward slope and quickly into these other 5 ADLs, or it might just be gradual with one little thing at a time. So what now is considered an ADL? And this is an ADL for the criterion of assessment of getting into long-term care, as well as certain healthcare policies. So that's personal hygiene or grooming. That's being able to dress yourself, do up buttons, do up zippers. Toileting, can you get on and off the toilet safely? Are you able to actually take care of your personal hygiene? Transferring and ambulating. Are you able to get in and out of the bed? Are you able to get in and out of the chair when you're watching TV? Can you safely go up and down stairs, get through your front door? And eating, are you able to feed yourself? Are you able to cook for yourself? Are you able to safely do the dishes and put stuff away? The reason why I have this slide in and it discusses long-term care is because what I find is a very frequent misunderstanding is the difference between assisted living, long-term care, and retirement living. The terms seem to be used quite a bit interchangeably, and they are very different structures, both from a cost perspective and from a criterion perspective. So long-term care are also called nursing homes. It is based on a medical model, not a social model. To get into a long-term care facility, you would have to have a medium to extensive physical, memory, or palliative care issue. It is wait list dependent, and that is very important for you to know, especially when you're doing retirement planning for your clients. Right now in Ontario, so I'm based in Ontario, the wait list is over 48,000 people long. It is not available for walk-ins. In Canada alone right now, by 2035, there is projected a 200,000 shortage of beds. It's more appropriate for aggressive behaviors because it tends to be a medicalized treatment plan, and they can be both privately or publicly owned. So just to back up for a sec, to get into long-term care, an assessment has to be done to see how needy are you within a list of criterion to put you somewhere on that list. And remember, to get into long-term care, what has to happen is a room or a bed has to be available. If a place is full, what has to happen is the person has to be transferred out. So you might be eligible for their bed, or they have to die for you to be eligible for a bed because it becomes available. What is retirement living? So we hear a lot about that, and that is a very different lifestyle. It's based on a social model. So the questions that tend to come up with retirement living tends to be, I feel so isolated. I'm so lonely. I'm just tired of cooking for myself. I'm tired of doing all the chores around the house. I need a little bit of reminding to take my medications. I need somebody to prepare my meals. I need a social atmosphere to thrive. So it is a social model, as I mentioned, and it's more to do with independent. It's more to do with independent living, um, and what we're seeing now happen with retirement homes is that they are now offering menu items that are similar now to long-term care, and they're filling that gap. So they are providing now more substantial physical care, memory care. So some of you may be familiar with the term of memory suites. So when a client has Alzheimer's or dementia, it might have a memory suite, which tends to be higher in cost, and palliation or palliative care, which is end of life care. It is not wait list dependent. So what that means is with a long-term care facility, you need to make an application, you have to be assessed, your name goes on a waiting list, and you have to wait out a bed in your top 5 choices becoming available. With a retirement home, really it's, is there room and can you afford it? Retirement homes tend not to be appropriate for aggressive behaviors, and that's because it tends to be a much less medicalized model, and they tend to be privately owned. So this is out-of-pocket pay. So when we talk about long-term care needs and common needs, we're hearing a lot about aging in place, in-home care. So that would be somebody coming into your home, whether it is government funded through OHIP or private pay, which means you call someone like Acclaim Health and say, mom or dad needs help getting out of bed, cleaning themselves up in the morning and having their breakfast and their medications. That is private pay. The cost of that right now is anywhere between $35 to $60, depending on the skill level of the person being sent in. So it requires assistance with daily living, and it can be skilled nursing care. So that could be changing of a bag, a changing of a catheter, wound care. And it also can be simple stuff like cooking, cleaning, and chores, which would be taken care of by a PSW. Then we look at assisted living within retirement homes, and it's a bit similar to in-home care, but it's not happening in your home. It's happening basically in an adult condo. The difference with that, though, is there is not the same social isolation that you may be experiencing at home. So we've all seen the lobbies of these retirement homes. They're quite lovely. They smell great. They're quite festive. They have organized events, outings, recreational activities, which tends to be part of the overall cost. But it also allows you to have access to medical services. So there always tends to be a doctor on staff, a nurse, as well as PSWs. They all have emergency response systems. So there is protocol if something were to happen, which hospital do you go out to, and what happens to your room. Then we come to long-term care and nursing homes. So this is a comprehensive medical model. It's round-the-clock care, it's rehab services, and it is also specialized medical treatments. You have personal care from the time you get up to the time you go to sleep. They are trying to reduce the ratio between a personal support worker and the amount of people that they are taking care of. The issue that they're having right now, and this was something that happened sort of throughout the pandemic and even now, it tends to be that there is not enough staff to actually fill these spots. So they're still having problems with that ratio of care coming down. Within a long-term care facility, there tends to be social and recreational activities, and they're designed to try and keep a resident functioning, keep the resident from deteriorating further. And each floor within a nursing home tends to service a different level of support. So the activities tend to be geared towards maybe on a floor might be a heavier care floor because it might be a stroke floor, in which case it might be more rehab activities. On let's see, a memory suite floor, it might be more cognitive activities. So they do try to make the programs more specific to the need. We may experience this, we may hear our clients talking about it and see what the impact is on their actual portfolios. There is absolutely a financial impact to aging, and it starts from the time of if you're in your home, any sort of supports you have to bring in to help take care of you, to what happens when that support that you bring into the home is not enough, or you become too medically complex, where you need much more care, wound care, diabetic treatment, redirection, that sort of stuff. In which case, we can see with the care that the cost starts to go up. And also, the conundrum ends up being we're in a stage of decumulation normally within retirement. What happens when something goes wrong and there's a total depletion of savings? We have longer life expectancy now, and it could lead to outliving of retirement funds, depending how robust that savings was and what the issue is that you're having. And obviously, there are investment risks. Money's in the market. We need to manage clients' money for both cash flow and we need to manage it for growth and longevity, which means you're putting money in the market, which poses risk. So, what happens in a market decline? Insurance needs. We have health insurance, we have life insurance, we have long-term care insurance. These products are great when they're started early enough that the premiums are low. When these products are started sort of in older age, the premiums become so high that it's one of the solutions that becomes less and less attainable. Our income needs change, and it changes at a time when we get into fixed income. So, as we age, we're relying on CPP, we're relying on OAS, our RSPs converted to a RIF, our LIRAs converted to a LIF. It becomes quite budget determinant. We're seeing more and more seniors, especially after the pandemic, going back out to work because they need the additional income to shore up their reserves, because they're discovering what the reality is as well to retirement living. And estate planning, we do need to encourage all Canadians to assign their POA for care, POA for property, so that's power of attorney, and their wills. Right now, we're still at the statistic of 50% of all Canadians have a will. The corollary of that is 50% of Canadians don't have a will. Are you happy with what you leave behind for the person who's going to have to sort through your affairs, which tends to be a loved one? Are they able to do this? Is that a fair task to leave behind as your legacy? And tax implications. We always have to be thinking about that when we're arranging our accounts and stuff. What happens when somebody dies and, their RIF is huge? What happens to the tax treatment of that? So when we look at what does long-term care cost and how can we possibly fund it, it is a big task. We sort of go into the personal savings first, which tends to be immediately when something happens, it tends to be needing to react immediately to the cost of care. So it tends to be the savings account or the non-registered account first. After that, it tends to be the TFSA next because there's no tax implication to removing money from the TFSA. And then it starts looking at, okay, what other personal savings are there? What does the RSP, the LIRA, the RIF, and the LIF look like? And part of the important calculation that needs to be done is how long does it last and when does it run out? And the issue with that ends up being, what is the date of death? What is the trajectory into date of death? Long-term care insurance, that's something that is very hard to find right now, and it tends to be when it first came out. It was something that wasn't very well understood. The need wasn't as prominent as it is today, and it was very expensive anyway. So we tended to see providers become smaller and smaller and smaller. Right now, one of the few providers that I'm aware of is Sun Life, which offers a retirement health assist insurance, which is a bit of a replacement to long-term care insurance. And again, it goes by the premium. So when you start looking at long-term care insurance, it tends to be when you have the free funds and you're at that older age that you're starting to hear those stories about friends, family, cohort having a health incident. By then, though, what happens is the premium becomes rather obstructive to the care. This is why long-term care insurance is one of those plans that what you really need to do is when you're speaking to your clients and talking to them about the whole plan and what to look like, you'd be wanting to start the discussion of long-term care insurance much, much earlier on. And obviously there's government programs. We know that there's CPP, there's OAS, and depending what your income is, there's additional support through Guaranteed Income Supplement, which is the GIS. And what became popular in the last little bit, especially while interest rates were much higher than they are today, was annuities. Annuities became popular again with lifetime retirement income until the day you die. So what we're also hearing a lot about are reverse mortgages. It's an interesting product. We're hearing it more because what we're seeing is that a lot of people are fixed asset heavy, which is a house, and liquid asset poor, for a lack of a better word. What tends to happen though with somebody who's 55 and older, we need to make sure that they actually understand the terms of how a reverse mortgage works. I'd have to say I myself have never counseled a client or participated in a reverse mortgage. So I just know the typical rules and that's about it. So just to qualify that. We have life insurance policies. There's a lot of hybrid policies out there now, but you'd really want to make sure that when you're getting a life insurance policy that you want to make sure that you're actually ascertaining what happens if I need to access the funds prior to death. So let's say I become sick, let's say become disabled, let's say I get a cancer diagnosis, let's say I get a dementia diagnosis. How can I access those funds to help with my care needs as opposed to waiting till I die and then whoever's named as beneficiary gets it or the estate gets it to cover expenses? Where does the need come, before you die or after you die? And we're hearing much more about this these days, and that's family support. Right now, the majority of care, 70% of Canadians are providing care to loved ones. And that could be any sort of support, whether it's financial support. 25% of baby boomers are relying on their parents for financial support. That could be when you go grocery shopping, doing the extra shopping for your parents. That could be paying for their home insurance, paying for their support while they're aging in place, snow removal, lawn services, housekeeping, meal services. This is becoming a very growing trend, and this also really articulates the healthcare gap that we are seeing right now between the amount of service that can be provided compared to the amount of people who are in need of service. Something that's really important to have as part of that conversation is estate planning and legal considerations. Sometimes clients are very resilient to the idea of choosing somebody to be a financial power of attorney because it requires a certain element of trust and ability, or even a healthcare POA. They have a fear that somebody's going to make a decision that wouldn't be in their best interest. And I think it's one of those things of the choice becomes, if you have not assigned someone and something happens to you, are you content with never having had that discussion with someone and someone making a decision thinking that this is what you would like? It's an emotional conversation that we have with our clients, but at the same time, I think it's quite necessary. Until the day we die, we have that ability to be independent in our decision making by making our wishes and intentions and our values known ahead of time. Wills, so much can go wrong when a will is not put in place. You have to think, is this where I wanted my assets to go? Have I treated my children fairly? Um, do any beneficiaries need special treatment? And that would be the use of trusts. And even estate taxes, we have to take a look at. And again, I do believe this is a hard thing to do. If you are uncertain about the date of death, it's hard to say the first thing that we're going to do is run down the registered plan, because at death they're taxed most heavily. It tends to be a bit of a balancing act, and that's why, in my personal opinion, I think it's necessary to have ongoing conversations with our clients to develop that trust that they are willing to um, be a little bit more candid with us about what's happening with them, so we can help them plan as best as possible with the resources that they do have. Commonly, what I'm asked when I do presentations is, I don't know how to have this conversation. It's just too emotional. It's difficult. No one wants to talk about it. I don't want to talk about it. And the problem with that is, more often than not, and these are correctable things, individual investors are uninformed, incorrectly informed, or they're in denial about the risks of not planning for a healthcare crisis or an age-related issue. And what I mean by that is, a lot of Canadians have the belief that when something happens to me, the government is going to intervene and they are going to take care of me. And the issue with that is, there's a pool of resources and there's all Canadians. There's not enough in the pool right now to actually take care of the need. As a human, obviously, planning for something that's going to happen in 10, 15, 20 years, it's really hard because it doesn't have that sense of urgency, and it doesn't feel like it could be a reality because I'm sitting here well right now. We all think nothing's going to happen to me, it all happens to the other person. Look at them. We all fear losing independence. We want to be independent until the day we die. Sometimes we lack self-awareness. So we think we are making good decisions. We think we are taking care of ourselves well. And it's because we are no longer aware of the impact that we're having to ourselves on our personal lifestyle. Fear. We are very fearful to let go the reins and let somebody else do our decision making. And trust. If you want something done, the best way to do it is do it yourself. So one of the interesting things, I think, when we're having conversations with our clients is to make sure that when we talk or ask them questions, or even, and this doesn't have to be with clients, this could be, the practice point is with our family, with our friends. We need to ask questions in such a way that when they're answered, they have only the direction of agreeing with you as a starting point. So an example, I know you love your family and want to make sure you provide for them. You've done that all your life, right? Rarely will you ever have someone who's going to say, no, that's not true. If you were unable to make financial decisions for yourself, what would that look like? Can we write down some thoughts? I would be shocked if someone said, no, Neela, I don't think that's worthwhile. You've worked so hard during your lifetime to save and invest for your goals. Now, let's give it the attention it deserves. Does that sound fair? Planning for any type of risk, whether it's financial, health, or longevity, it's easiest when it's not done under stress or crisis. Don't you agree? So even when I'm asking these questions out loud, for those of you who are on the call today, does that resonate with you? Even if you have your own trepidation with having these conversations with your partner, with your friends, with your spouse, when you're asked that, does it sound reasonable? Does it sound calm? Does it sound like here's one point that we can start at right now to get this conversation going? Oh, thank you. Can we set aside a bit of time to talk about longevity risk? I don't want you to outlive your money. Does that keep you up at night? Do you know how many times people are worried and kept up at night thinking that I don't know the date I'm going to die or how I'm going to die, and I'm really worried about outliving my money? Because the second step of that is if you outlive your money, what happens? Who's taking care of you? Does that now become your adult children's responsibility? Have you had that conversation with your adult children? Can they do it? How does it disrupt their life? Next, can we talk about your plan for aging and care? Do you think your kids worry about what the plan is and their role in it? So many times, parents make the assumption that their children, their adult children, will be their power of attorney for care, power of attorney for property, and that they don't have to do any planning, they don't have to have any discussions because it'll automatically fall in place. It is no gift to a child, an adult child, to anyone, to get a call at 3 in the morning saying your mom or dad is in ER. They can't speak because they've just had a major stroke. Can you come down and tell me what they would like? I get it. This is emotional. No one wants to feel helpless or lose independence. Let's talk about some decisions now while you are not faced with a crisis. Is that okay? I would be shocked if anybody said that they've asked a client or somebody that question, somebody said, no, it's not okay. Let me help with the conversation, since it is helpful to discuss the expense and importance of healthcare planning. I think one of the most important gifts you can give to your loved ones is peace of mind. Don't you think that's a great gift your kids would love? And I think this is that line right there, that might be an easy one as we have Christmas and holidays coming up, because it is a gift. It is a gift to leave everything in order. So at a time when whoever the survivors are left behind, they can deal with grieving your loss, you not being there, and not grieving at, oh my gosh, I have no idea what to start. This is a mess. Mom and dad never talked to me about this, but look, I am left behind and this is my memory of them. And please note, these conversation starters, I am saying all of this from personal experience. I was a caregiver to my mom and dad for a decade of my life. We had very open conversations about living and dying. We had the documents in place, we had the finances in place. And the reason why I went on this journey is because we had everything in place. My background is in geriatrics. My first career was in long-term care, and it was still one of the worst tasks I've ever had to do. So I look at this now and I implore everyone that if you find this difficult to do, start these conversations with those closest to you so that you are comfortable having these conversations. Part of holistic retirement planning is not only dealing with the life and the exciting parts, children going off to university and retirement living and the great trip we're going to reward ourselves with. It's also dealing with, how do you want to die? What care do you want in place? What is that going to cost you? What autonomy do you wish to have on that very last day? All of that requires planning. It doesn't just happen. And we know from research that the more planning that's put into those end of life conversations, longevity conversations, tends to have better outcomes both on the death experience and actually on the grieving process. So something that, it's sort of in a way like retirement planning, but it's just a teeny bit different because we're discovering more of the stickier stuff, the more emotional stuff. So when you're doing a comprehensive plan for an aging client, this is what I would recommend, just sort of as a template, let's call it. I think part of the conversations, once we have enough trust with our client and there's enough of a relationship where you can actually get to this point, would be having conversations on how are they doing health wise, how are they doing mentally and emotionally. Part of that emotional health ends up being, you know have you had this conversation with your partner, with your spouse, about what happens if one of us needs care? Can the other one provide it? How are they doing physically? What we're seeing more and more of is, especially within spousal units or partner units, is that a person who's unwell is taking care of the partner who's even more unwell. And this is among the first time in sort of recorded research and stuff that we're seeing it at such a level where perfect examples right now are people who have been early diagnosed with any form of dementia, taking care of the spouse who has officially been diagnosed with Alzheimer's. So it might be third or fourth stage and early diagnosis. Living arrangements, I think it's important to have conversations with the clients about where do you intend to age? And if it's at home, that's great. But what sort of budget do we need to put aside to age safely in the home? And aging safely in the home are home modifications. So wider banisters everywhere, lower handles, lighting, no throw rugs, grab bars in the bathroom, lower bed so there's not the risk of getting on and off the bed. So what does the budget look like for a home modification? Put that in the plan if they are able to say, I want to age in my house as long as possible. One of the things we often hear is they're going to carry me out in a body bag. If your client is adamant about that, make sure that part of the retirement plan is a home modification budget. Financial status, obviously we need to know what is the pool that the client or ourselves will eventually be drawing from, and how to section that off, that not only are we taking care of our retirement needs, so the ongoing cash flow needs and the necessary sustainable growth, but the last 9 years of life tend to be the most expensive, and that's when health issues start to happen. So making sure we've accommodated for that. And I want to say this, I think it's really important that we accommodate for that before we also have conversations about legacy planning and beneficiaries. I think it has to be in there that until the day we die, that money is ours to be used for our well-being and our support. And once I'm dead and all my taxes and obligations are covered, here is here's what's for my beneficiary, here's for what's donation, here's for what's the trust. Identifying needs and goals. I think it's important to determine immediate and long-term healthcare requirements, and that can be simple things like a client saying to you, I've just been diagnosed with diabetes. So we know one of the risk factors once you're diagnosed with diabetes is there's an increased risk of heart disease. Heart disease can be a heart attack, ischemic heart issues, or it can even be a stroke. What happens if the client has a stroke and requires care? Lifestyle goals, socially, what do they want? Are they isolated right now at home? Would it be an idea to have that conversation if there is money in the budget that, with a retirement home, you won't be socially isolated. You have access to lots of recreational daily activities. Would this be something you would consider? And if the answer comes up yes, then it would be the idea, okay, you know what, a retirement home on average right now is between $5,000 and $6,000 a month. So does our budget accommodate $60,000 to $72,000 a year? So remember, we're not having the house expense. We're going to end up having our meals covered and stuff. So when we look at what the housing options are, it's very important to know the costs to incorporate that in the financial plan. Let's say the conversation goes towards, no, I'm going to live in my house as long as possible. And then when I need it, I'm going to try and access long-term care. So it's understanding that accessing long-term care right now is much more difficult because there is such a long list. So it's being able to say the average wait time in Ontario, depending on the home, is 2 to 5 years. What are we going to do to fill in that financial gap for 2 to 5 years if we can't get you a bed? If you still want age in place, we need to bring care in. If we need to bring care in, care is between $35 and $60 an hour. It tends to be a 3-hour minimum when you're booking for someone to come in. What 3 hours is where our greatest need is? And if we need longer, how long can this budget take care of us aging in place before that room becomes available in a long-term care facility? And when we look at financial goals, there's all sorts that we can set. And I know, when we're looking at being closer to retirement, it does tend to be stuff like as soon as you retire, you do want to reno the house a bit. You do want to, get a nicer car. You do want to go on a couple trips. And I think part of that discussion ends up being, okay, do you have an idea that you're going to sell the house? And if so, what have you done as your research? If you want to stay in the current area you're in, so I'm Mississauga, have I looked around at 3 to 5 of the retirement homes? And it's really easy. The retirement homes right now, because they are in such a niche and demand area, they are more than willing to accommodate tours. And with the tours, usually get a lunch or a dinner. So it's a good way to see, what does everybody look like here? How happy do they seem? Talk to them. See what it is they like. See what it is that they don't like. So you can make a good decision for yourself and for your clients, or you can talk about it in a meaningful way. Really, really important to explore all government programs. Obviously, I mentioned before CPP, OAS, GIC. If you're on the lower income threshold, take a look at what insurance products your clients do have, and if any of them do have options for long-term care, or even for critical illness in case there's an immediate diagnosis of heart disease or cancer or any of the criterion that's covered in critical illness. What sort of savings do they have? How liquid is it? So, I mean, we look at a day like today, day after election, and up until yesterday and this morning, everything wants to move higher. How much risk can the client take before it starts impacting their long-term care plan? And it is developing a care plan. So it is the idea of documenting, what does your client or the person who's around you, what do they say, what do they want to do, and how are we going to be able to afford it? And actually have that conversation, as difficult as it can be, if the plan says you can't afford this. They need to know. I had done a presentation at the Elder Planning Conference in the summertime. And after I had gotten through my presentation, one of the people who was sitting in the audience, he actually made the comment that he thought having this conversation with clients was cruel. And and I had to ask, is it the way I present it in terms of be direct, don't beat around the bush, just be direct? Clients will appreciate that because they need to know this is affecting their well-being. Or is it the idea of most people have not saved enough to have this conversation? And he said, talking about death with a client is very cruel. And I think personally, and this is very personal for me, I think I have to disagree. Part of life within the spectrum is dying. Part of retirement planning is planning also for death. And I think we've just come from an environment where we're so stigmatized or afraid to use that word because of the feelings it may evoke that we're not. I dare anyone to say, what does it feel like to anyone who has been in ER or ICU with a parent who's unable to advocate for themselves and who has never had a conversation with them, and you're feeling beyond yourself with trying to figure this out? And this is like, oh, thank you for the hearts and the applauses. This is a personal feeling, and I think part of North American stigma is using the death word, but we're able to use all sorts of other euphemisms. Thank you. These emojis are kind of neat. Oh, I think we're on to the next slide. Are we able to switch to the next slide? Oh, beg your pardon, sorry, my mistake. If we can go back to the, fifth step, legal and estate planning. We've gone through this, wills and trusts. We just have to be talking to our clients about this and following up and talking to our clients about the problems that we have as well. Like maybe, you know, when we think of it, right now there's a couple hundred people on this call right now. If we think half of Canadians don't have wills, that means half of us right now don't have an updated will. Why? What's holding you back? What are you afraid of? What is the repercussion of not having it? Powers of attorney. And power of attorney, none of this is necessarily age related. We could just step out the door right now and there can be an accident. What happens when something happens from a health perspective, health crisis perspective, and you land up in the ICU and you're unable to communicate, and the child that you never had a conversation with is forced to make a decision for you? What decision do you want them to guess at? And how does that leave them feeling? Advanced care directives. So people are preparing what's now called advanced healthcare directives, living wills, and healthcare proxies. These are not legal documents. They're not legal binding documents. They're basically a written set of best wishes of what I would like, what I value, what I hold important to me. I myself have an advanced care directive attached to my power of attorney for care. And the reason why I took it upon myself to do this is I have one child, a daughter, who is 20 years old, and she's very, very sensitive. She still cries when she sees roadkill. I am high risk for cancer and heart disease. And I feel that it is my responsibility as a parent, as a mother, to have down what I value, what I want, so that if something were to happen to me and she has to be my advocate, I am not putting her in an ethical, moral, or guilt-ridden decision on trying to think of what would mom want, as opposed to here is what I would like. I just need you to advocate on my behalf. And she's aware of that. I've had the conversation and it wasn't easy. I'd be the first to say, looking into the face of somebody who looks very much like you when they're very young, it's very hard to have this conversation. But I picture the other side. What would it feel like to her if I never had this conversation and she needs to guess, and all her life she thinks I guessed wrong? And I think one of the final pieces is to implement and monitor the plan. I think it's necessary when we're doing really involved planning with our clients, especially when it does involve longevity planning, that we do check upon them periodically. How are they doing? Has there been any change in health? Have you had those conversations? How can I help you have those conversations? Is there anyone I can put you in touch with to help, whether it is an elder planning counselor, whether it's a care provider firm that can, intervene and provide some support so that you can live your your best independent life while at home. It's knowing all those things. So it's developing a network around you of experts, trusted experts, that you can outsource people to or recommend to, so that they do feel that they are being taken care of and they can proceed with confidence. So this is a case study, and what I would what I would like to mention is that this case study was made up. This was not a real case study. And the reason why it's made up is I would have to be honest enough and say that in all my years of talking about aging and stuff like that, there has yet to be a perfect situation where the saving was started early enough, the conversations were had early enough, the decision to downsize or right size was made early enough. It's such a stigmatized conversation that there's such resilience that it tends to be a conversation that you drip on. And by time they start understanding things, you would hope that all of this stuff is in place. But again, I have to admit that I have yet to find that perfect situation. So here's a couple, Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, and they're living in their own home in Toronto and they're mortgage free. Mr. Johnson is 70 and he was just diagnosed with early stage dementia. And just so we know, if the dementia that's being diagnosed is Alzheimer's, Alzheimer's tends to be diagnosed in second and third stage. Mrs. Johnson has arthritis. For the sake of argument, I'm going to say she has rheumatoid arthritis, and rheumatoid arthritis puts somebody at higher risk for heart disease. their financial situation. They have 600,000 in their RSP, 200,000 in TFSAs. They have a combined income for CPP and OAS, and Mr. Johnson has a pension. Their challenge, obviously this is everybody's challenge, increasing medical expenses and potential long-term care needs. Asset protection, how are they going to protect their savings and cover the cost of care without running out money before the last person dies? And it tends to be the last person to die will be Mrs. Johnson. And as a caregiver, what tends to happen is most of the resources tends to be spent out on the first person who requires assistance, leaving a much smaller pool for the person left behind, which typically tends to be a female. Estate planning challenge is managing their estate to minimize taxes and ensure their wishes are followed. Again, the conundrum or a bit of the difficulty with this is how long are they going to live to say what accounts to draw down first. Next slide. So strategies implemented. In the perfect scenario, this would have been having a conversation with the couple when they were in their 40s to purchase a long-term care policy to cover their in-home care and assisted living costs. And the key with a long-term care policy is to double check where that care can be provided. Can it be provided institutionally, whether you're in a retirement home or a long-term care facility, so getting extra care, or can it also be provided for you if you're living in place? Health savings, allocating a portion of the TFSA for future medical expenses. My TFSA, in my mind, that is my medical expense account. Income management, invested in deferred annuities to provide the additional income starting at age 85. They delayed CPP and OAS so that they could max out what they were going to get. They established a family trust so that assets could be put in the trust for distribution later on. They discussed the possibility of providing care, especially because Mr. Johnson has early stage dementia, and dementia itself can be a marathon or it can be a sprint. It's quite unique to each person. They discussed the possibility of doing a reverse mortgage if necessary to free up some money for cash flow. They put their wills, trusts, and power of attorneys in place. The advisor did regular reviews, made sure that everything was still progressing health-wise and that there was no increase in health need. And they had regular family meetings. So as an advisor, helped facilitate those conversations, those difficult conversations with the family so that everybody was on the same page. And part of the advantage of having these family discussions also ends up being in the event that the first person dies, statistically, we know that the remaining spouse tends to go to wherever their kids have their accounts. If you're providing this service to a client, I think what it does, it shows that mom and dad were more to you than just a client. They were part of your family and part of your practice. And I think that is a good way, a great way actually of developing trust and keeping that generation with you, because they know that you are dealing with more than just, what am I making off of their assets? That's one. Oh, we've come to the end, so I welcome any comments or questions. And again, I know this is a difficult conversation. What I always recommend to people is two things to start it. One is to start the conversation with your family and friends. That is easiest, so you can get over the stumbling, the hurdles, the fear. And I think after that, it's being honest with your client, saying how difficult you found having this conversation with your own family was, which is why you want to start it with the client as well. It takes time.
Thanks so much, Neela. This was so insightful. It's a sensitive topic that all of us need to be privy of in terms of how to approach it, not only with our advisors, but also each other within our families and the people that we care about. Financial planning when it comes to retirement is incredibly relevant, especially in today's financial and economic climate. So we really, really appreciate you sharing your expertise and knowledge. There are a couple of great questions that we'd love to try to squeeze in before the end of the webinar. We do have a very interesting question that is sort of a bit niche in terms of being connected to retirement for people, which is, are you able to speak to a situation where aging parents are concerned with how to set things up for for a child who is 100% dependent and currently in their care?
Mhm. Um, so the first couple things I would say with that is I think it's very important to consult a lawyer, because I think what you'd need to do first and foremost is make sure that your will is set up in such a way that upon your death, those assets go into a Henson trust if there is disability. So I think that would be the first thing. I think what you'd also want to do is, if you have an adult child who's 100% dependent on you, I think it's incumbent on you to reach out to LHIN, which is now, I think, Ontario Home Health, to discuss what happens when you die. What are supportive environments where that adult child can gain access to, and how is that access determined, just in case there's any paperwork that you can actually start now that gets them on a list. So I think you'd want to talk to community providers. You'd also want to look into any sort of retirement home and long-term care facilities. So the one thing, and this is a common, and I can understand this is a common misunderstanding. The criterion to get into a nursing home, to a long-term care facility, isn't age. You just need to be 18 years old, have an OHIP card, and to have at least two things that you're unable to do to actually get you on a list to begin with, to be assessed, to be saying, okay, yes, you need help with one of these five things. It's actually two of these five things. So remember, it's not you have to be a certain age. This is for anyone who needs support. So I think it would be incumbent to go touring nursing homes, long-term care facilities within your area so that you can see what type of environment, what sort of support, how do I access this upon my death? Oh, and I guess funds. Obviously, with a long-term care facility, it's co-funded by the government. So right now, as of July 1st, 2024, a private room was $2,909. That is what you pay, and then there's a copay by the government. So it's being able to say, okay, this is the amount of money that I have, that I believe, or that I've earmarked to leave behind for the adult child. It's in a trust. Who's the trustee on that trust to make sure that the payments go to the long-term care facility and my child is taken care of as well?
Right,
Hope that answered it.
that's very insightful. It's definitely helpful. Um, when we think about clients who may have limited resources,
Mhm.
do you have anything that you could share on strategies that might be the most beneficial for those individuals, and how advisors can initiate those conversations when it
Mhm.
comes to sort of managing that element of resources and just how expensive things can be?
Right. If so, if there's limited resources, the one thing that I do know about retirement homes, unfortunately, it is basically an adult condo, just like a condo. If you were going to lease it or rent it, the cost is the cost, and here's the menu of items. So pretend the base cost is $5,000, but you need assistance with bathing, with taking medications, whatever. The cost incrementally goes up, like a menu of items. If you're going towards a long-term care facility and you think, okay, I would like a private room, or I'd like to apply, and that's 2,900, but the combination of CPP and OAS doesn't cover it. The next step is applying for GIS, which is Guaranteed Income Supplement, and that's for lower income people. And on top of that, if you're assessed that you have need to be in a long-term care facility, but you don't have the resources, what you would do is you talk to the nursing home, and you can actually apply for something that's called a long-term care rate reduction program, and it's means tested. So they're going to take a look at your tax filing. They're going to do a means test on it, and you have to do that every year to make sure that you're eligible for the rate reduction.
Okay, thank you. Um, And then another question we have is
Oh, sorry,
around,
can I just
oh,
back up one sec? Sorry,
sure,
one thing to add, and
sure.
we do see this a lot as well. For those people that don't afford it, aren't sort of are on limited resources and stuff. I think part of it is having that conversation with them about, have they had that conversation with the people around them? Is there any support that can be provided by them, whether it be maybe financially, or maybe if they're still living at home, when they're doing cooking, can they do some batch cooking and freeze it? Could, they help out with groceries or household chores so it saves on costs that way?
Yes, that makes a lot of sense. And then another question, just trying to squeeze another one in here,
Okay.
is around just, the very stark reality that advisors who are working with clients on topics of this kind can elicit a variety of emotions,
Hmm.
both in the client and then, of course, on the advisor side, which places them in a position where, in addition to offering guidance on the financial and more technical aspects of things, they also may be leaned on for emotional support. So, how can advisors healthily offer this support? And do you think that there's a line that needs to be drawn to preserve
Yeah.
objectivity from the advisor's side?
Ooh, that's a sticky one. So,
Mhm.
okay. Yes and yes. Yes, the conversations get sticky. Yes, they get emotional. Yes, they can involve tears. Um, I think, like anyone, we need to be empathetic and give somebody space to have that emotion to cry, to have their moments of silence, and to be silent with them. So I think that's necessary. Where do we set our boundary that we're not playing counselor, or we're not the sort of first line of call for emotional counseling compared to an actual counselor? I think it's being able to say and being honest. And this is the hardest part, right? Sometimes we want to be all things to all people, but the reality is we can't. And I think it's being able to say, you know what? I understand if this continuously happens and stuff like that, I understand how upset you are. I'd like to put you in touch with someone. Can I give you some counselor's name so they can help you?
Right,
So they can help you get through this, or they can set up some boundaries for you yourself in getting to point B. And I
right.
think that there's where the network of experts comes in handy, being able to have resources of counselors, uh,
Hmm.
sorry, thinking counselors,
Yeah,
any other expert where you can say, hey, I need to build out mine because this is now the direction my business is going, and this is now the reality of what clients are
right,
asking, right? It's no longer
right,
just the one line item of
right,
tell me all about Loblaws, right? it's,
right,
it's no
right,
longer that sort of stuff.
right. Okay, we only have like 2 minutes left, but I wanted to get one last little question in, which is, you've discussed retirement planning specifically and what that might look like today. Do you think there's room to discuss aging and long-term care as part of, for example, an estate and legacy planning strategy rather than a focus on retirement? Is that something that's beneficial for people to try to tackle during
Hmm.
those other conversations or with
Yes.
those advisors?
Yes, absolutely. Whoever said that, that's hitting it right on the head. I think it is, pretend your retirement plan looks like this, and here's day one, and I wake up tomorrow morning and I'm retired. Here's the list of things I'd like to do, my bucket list, the potential costs for them. Here's sort of that after the honeymoon part of the retirement's over, what am I doing to keep myself engaged, to keep myself healthy? Here's the cost of the gym and whatever else. Here's what I'd like to leave to my children, to that charity. Okay, that's this part. But just before that becomes, how am I doing health wise? What does my family history look like? If I were to have a diagnosis with dementia, and I keep saying dementia because it's one of the fastest growing issues globally and in North America, and same with heart disease. Let's say we have family history of this. Let's say there's a diagnosis and I want to age in place. Having that conversation saying, okay, if you want to age in place and you want to bring care in, we need to allocate this much of your retirement plan to your care before you can possibly access long-term care, which means promising the beneficiaries that they're going to have a $1 million inheritance, or promising the charity that they're going to have this, is not superseded by your actual need until you die.
Right.
You know, here would be a perfect example. My mom and dad, as I mentioned, I had taken care of them for a decade of my life, and we had the conversations, we had the planning in place. Before, by time my dad died, and it was pancreatic cancer, we had spent 176,000 in private care, and my mom, 5 years, she broke her neck, became disabled, 5-time cancer survivor. By time she died, we spent just under 500,000 in care. So if I think about legacy planning and, beneficiaries, that was 700,000 that wasn't part of that plan, right?
Right, right. That makes sense. There's a lot of unexpected things that can come up that you're not
Absolutely.
necessarily, that we don't necessarily know enough about to accommodate or to think to accommodate prior. So that makes a lot of sense. Thank you so much, Neela, for joining us today. And thank you to our audience. There were some wonderful questions. We couldn't get to all of them given our time constraints, but we encourage everyone to continue to attend our events, and we'll definitely be talking about this more with Neela in the future. If you have any additional questions, please reach out to us for support via csi.ca. A replay of this event will be available in the coming days, and we will also be sharing the slides that Neela has shown us here today. For more information on our upcoming events, please visit our websites at our Insights section under webinars. You can see past webinars as well as upcoming webinars for Financial Literacy Month. Neela, thank you again. It was such a scintillating conversation. I think everyone really enjoyed it based on all the emojis I'm seeing.
I was just going to say, you know what? This is going to be such an awesome afternoon for me, because I am just thrilled looking at all of the all of these emojis. Wow, thank you very much.
Definitely encouraging. Thank you so much, Neela. Thank you everyone for joining today. Have a lovely day.
Be well, everyone.
Bye, everyone.